No, when I was there, I didn't go to the thing.
When the families came?
Yeah, I went to New Jersey. And I mean, we went to Massachusetts. While they had their class. Cute one too. Oh, Amy is here. Oh. You just want to see.
That'll be okay. It'll be fun.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. You're right. How are you? It has been. She's been under here. It's not even getting better. How about you?
Thank you. So, the female is going into its bait. So, Joe Graskin. My bloody dog.
Oh, where is Doug?
He's in the back. We're going to send the guy just in case he has to get out.
Okay.
Hey, how are you? How you guys? I'm sorry I missed last week.
Always good. We had a lot of fun. If you could see the little holes in the weeds, that's the best. We have to expand that if we want.
Yeah, no, I had just too much stuff going on. It is what it is, right?
Yeah, it was fun though. I mean, I'm not really can, but I can't have the impulsive have to plan it out.
Why, you were impulsive about it?
Fine, yeah, but my granddaughter said
Oh, I see.
I couldn't, it was very hard.
I can only imagine. I chose some other templates to sing those They were still years ago, and I had to sing that tick for 4 hours. I remember being like 9 years old. I was crying the whole time, and I was like 9. I understood the whole impact of the thing. Because many people were Mrs. So we were like, I've heard you talk about it. Yeah. All right, enjoy. You like it?
I'm not sure if I answered my brother-in-law today, or we also that close to her, you know, that they, yeah, but he sometimes teaches in the Shelton area. But so you're busy now, right? You're not bored. Need more time, right? Now you know, how do you have time for work?
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone, and thank you for making me out here, despite the cold weather and the storm this morning. It really means a lot that everyone came out here. It's such a night especially. This is a very, very important topic, a sad topic and a hard topic to listen to, but a very, very important one nonetheless. So I want to welcome everyone. And it's an honor to really have Mrs. Judith Alter Kallman grace us with her presence and her story. And she really bravely agreed to share her story with us today. So we're privileged to have her with us and to learn from her firsthand experiences. Judith, you may have to correct me, but you were born in Pieszczyn, Czechoslovakia. And Judith was the youngest of 6 children. I'm not going to give away her story. She'll say it firsthand better than I can ever say it. She was rescued and hidden by both Jews and Christians, and she spent the final year of the Holocaust in German-occupied Budapest in a race between survival and death. Again, Judith, if I'm making up any facts, correct me. That's fine. Judith arrived in America in 1956, having lived the post-war years in Europe, England, and Israel. Finally made it here I'm not sure if I'm missing any stops, but finally made it here to Connecticut, where she resides today in Greenwich, Connecticut. And in order to give meaning to her painful past, Judith was determined to write her highly praised memoir, A Candle in the Heart, which, by the way, is for sale at the front table, if you like. We have a limited amount of copies. And if you're brave enough to ask Judith for her autograph at the end, feel free. Judith, I was not prepared, so I apologize if I'm offering your services there. And Judith wrote her memoir to help young people understand the importance of stopping hate and speaking out against evil. The book that she wrote gave her a host of opportunities to speak to students at schools across the United States. And as a result of her educational work, she was honored by the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, the Greenwich Jewish Federation, the Teenage Holocaust Commemoration Committee, and many other groups. Judith was also the keynote speaker, as I looked up, so I hope I'm not making this up as well. But Judith was the keynote speaker at the Connecticut State Holocaust Commemoration in Hartford in 2015. So as we gather here to listen to Judith's story, we're reminded of the importance of remembering the past and the role that memory plays in shaping our present and the future. The Torah teaches us that memory is a sacred responsibility and that we have a duty to pass on the lessons of the past to future generations. I'm not sure if any of you saw the details, or at least the text that I had accompany the flyers or the ads that we had online. But one of the studies that we highlighted was a study that was done just a few years ago. A very painful study to read, actually. And I know that you guys are going to talk about this a little bit, where they discovered that 2/3 of American youth, starting from teens all the way to millennials, couldn't even name a single concentration camp. 2/3. It's about 65% of the youth in America cannot name a single concentration camp. And they know almost no details of the Holocaust. So tonight is a night of memory. As we read in the book of Deuteronomy, in the Torah, we read in Hebrew, it says, Zechor Yomot Olam, Binu Shnot Dor Vador, Sha'al Avicha V'Agetcha, Zekinecha V'Yom Rulach. Translated, it means remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations, ask your father and he will show you, your elders and they will tell you. The commandment to remember is repeated many times throughout the Torah, emphasizing the importance of passing on the stories and the experiences of our ancestors. Judith's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of memory. Her experiences and those of so many others who survived the Holocaust must never be forgotten. By remembering the past, we honor those who suffered and ensure that their stories are not lost to history. At the same time, Judith's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the unimaginable horrors that she endured, she has chosen to embrace life with courage and grace. Her message of hope and positivity is a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the importance of never giving up in the face of adversity. Tonight, we have the honor of having my dear mother-in-law, Mrs. Baila Olidort, to moderate the event. She is the founding editor of the Lubavitch International magazine, and as the director of communications at Chabad headquarters for many years. She has traveled widely, visiting Chabad centers around the world, and speaking to audiences about the work and vision of Chabad. So just to conclude, I want to express my deep gratitude to Judith for sharing her story with us today. May we honor her by remembering the past and by committing ourselves to creating a better future, one in which the lessons of the Holocaust are never forgotten. At the end of the event, depending on the time, we're going to see if we have time for some Q&A, but for now, the mic is yours. Does everyone hear? You can pass it on.
Good evening. So nice to see you all. Many of you I know. Some of you are new faces. Welcome.
I just want to say that this is such an honor and a privilege to be sharing this space with Judith. I read her book about a week ago, and I couldn't put it down. And then when I picked it up again yesterday, just to put some thoughts together, I have to tell you that my heart ached. It was literally painful to read what she has been through. And I feel that having her sit here with us, we are truly in the presence of greatness. And I encourage all of you to read the book, because we're not going to be able to cover her life in the time that we have here. And it's not something that anybody should not read, because of what it teaches us, as the rabbi said, about the human spirit, about the capacity for evil, and we talk a lot about resilience. We're looking at resilience over here to the umpteenth degree. So, Judith, the truth is, I could just give you the microphone and sit back, but I thought that maybe I would ask you to focus on certain parts of the book that really gripped me, and we're not going to tell your whole story, but we're going to give people a sense of what happened to you, what you've been through. So your memoir, I want to begin at the beginning. With a memoir, Judith sets the stage in her opening pages that I thought was very powerful. And I wonder if you would either tell us, or maybe start by telling us, no, actually this is something I wanted you to read, page 7. Yes, from the beginning.
Hello, everybody, and I want to thank you all for being here. And I hope that my story will just be part of history that we went through, and I hope you will pass it on to many generations in the future. That is a part of a history that must never be forgotten. That's what made me write the book, the importance of it, that we must be able to survive it and be able to be proud of being who we are, and we cannot take any more hate. We've got to correct it with love, and I'm depending on all of you that you will make your children, grandchildren know the history, that we all have to remember those who are not with us. Okay, when most people remember, I haven't read this book in a while, so if I am bad at reading, it's my fault. When most people remember their parents, they summon a tapestry of recollections. The fabric of their memory is woven from the intertwined threads of sights, sounds, smells, textures, tastes, and events embroidered into the design of their lives. I own no such tapestry. When I lost my parents to the Germans and their collaborators, I was too young to experience much of their personality or character beyond knowing that most of my basic needs were being met. A child's perception of what it meant to be loved and secured. I don't have that. I didn't have it either. I remember my parents' smiles, but even those were infrequent. That was because by the time I came along, the last of the 6 children, there was less and less to smile about. I will never know my mother's favorite color, my father's favorite dish, or what kind of music my parents liked. I will never know how they relaxed in the evenings or whether they went to the theater. Did they enjoy reading? What were their political beliefs? Did they adore the ballet as I do? Did they enjoy sports as I do? Did they love art and have talent for it as I seem to? I never had a chance to hear my parents tell the stories of their own childhoods. They never got to tell me about their sisters, brothers. What was it like to grow up? What their parents were like? How they lived their day-to-day lives? Did they love the warm weather or relish cold winters? Did they have a favorite holiday? What did they drink? Did they ever quarrel? What did they left the sun like? I will never know these things. I will never know the answers to a million questions, small and large, that have occurred to me day after day, year after year.
That last paragraph.
Some facts of their brief lives form the basis of the family tapestry that I began to weave anew. They define its size, mark its edges, but they are not fully woven into it. My surviving siblings and cousins have passed along reminiscence that are tantalizing points of color, but there are only few. Who can know how many colored threads my parents held within might have endured their lives? Their loss is deep, irretrievable, and incomprehensible.
So I hope you were able to capture what Judith wrote there about not having what most of us have as children, which was the memories of our parents. But Judith, you do have some vague memories about your early childhood. Tell us what you remember.
Well, I do remember certain things. I mean, I remember playing with my brothers in the courtyard of our house. We had a beautiful home, and our courtyard was inside our building, and but I had a taste already when my memory started. Was my experience of we were not allowed to go outside our building. We were not allowed to play outside. I remember my brothers coming home beaten up from schools. The Germans were already living in my hometown, and I had those memories. Was the beginning of my life. We had a beautiful Friday night dinner every Friday night for Shabbat, and rocks were thrown through the windows, and we had to hide under the table. I remember Friday night my father blessing me as the youngest child. I was able to sit in his lap. I have some very fond memories that I will never forget.
And tell us, what was your first memory of danger and fear? The very first.
Well, the first memory that I remember was when my brothers came home beaten up, and the Friday night that we had dinner, and the rocks were thrown through the window because we had a beautiful Shabbat. But my memory is really a beautiful one. Is when my mother lit the Shabbat candles, and my father came home from the synagogue, and we were 6 children, and we stood in line for his blessings. He would bless each one of us, And then me, as being the last child, he would grab me and put me on his lap, and I had the pleasure of that. But it was so vague, but the moments I do remember very strongly.
And what was, in the book, you talk about the first time the Nazis came into your home. You were sitting and playing on the floor.
Oh, many things happened in between.
At some point you had to run away.
Well, the last thing that I remember about my home was my mother would buy me shoes, pretty shoes, and they had to be buried into the ground to make it look very old, because the Nazis were not able to see that I had good shoes on, beautiful shoes. So my mother took me to the courtyard, and she buried my shoes overnight because they had to look worn. And I was heartbroken. I was crying over my shoes. Why did this have to happen? Why did she have to bury my beautiful shoes? And I couldn't come to understand it. But years later, we had to move because they were killing us. They were coming to homes looking for all the Jews to get them out of their homes. So we escaped. We escaped to another town and my father managed to get papers as non-Jews. We were living as non-Jews in Zilina. That's another town where originally we were put in. Well, at first we were living as non-Jews, basically, and somebody needed the apartment where we lived, and they reported us to the Gestapo that there are Jews living in our building. It was an apartment house, and they are living as secretly that we are not supposed to know. And the Nazis came, and well, what happened was that 4 of my siblings went to school, and I was home in the morning playing. I was a young kid playing on the floor when they banged on the door and said, "Open up, open up." My father was reading the newspaper. My mother was doing something. And they banged on the door and they said, "Open up, open up." And they came in and they immediately said, "We want to see the papers. We have to see the papers." So my father got the papers and showed it to the Germans. And our name was Mannheim at that time, because that was our original name, which was German. And they didn't believe it, and they said, "We need to take our papers." But my father said, "We must have the papers because this is our identity." And I was sitting there playing. I had no idea what was going on, except I heard them yelling at my father and immediately taking away from him the papers and left the apartment. During that time, my older sibling, they stayed in school. But the siblings who were a year and 2 years little older than myself, they came home. They were half a day in school. And then I was taken to the nursery at school, a pre-K. Or at that time it wasn't pre-K, it was whatever. It was a kindergarten, nursery. And I was taken there. So I didn't know what happened to my parents, but the 2 siblings that stayed home from school, the Gestapo came, the Germans, and took my parents, my mother, my father, and my brother and sister. They took them away We didn't know, I had no idea where or what, but they took them away as criminals. I was in the school with my siblings, and I see my brother and sister outside crying. My sister was hysterical, and my brothers didn't know what to do. And the teacher came and took me out of the class where I was playing, and they came and we became wanted children by the Germans. So they had to immediately hide us at that point, and we were separated from each other, and they hid us. Different people took us separately, and we were hidden. And my parents were taken to camp, not yet to the Auschwitz, but to a camp within the area.
So, I want to share with you. Now, Judith is separated from her parents and separated from her siblings. They told the children that there are 4 children. The Nazis knew that there were 4 children from the family that were missing when they came and took her parents. So they said, there's a hunt for the 4 of you, so we're going to have to separate you. Judith is how old?
I was 5 years old.
5 years old. And she is separated from her 3 remaining siblings. She was one of 6. Her parents were taken away with 2. And she was now separated. She was told, you have to, I'm telling you from the book, you have to behave like a grown-up. You're in danger, and you have to do what we tell you. These were, I think, Jewish partisans who were trying to help the Jews. At some point, she gets together. She's allowed to get together with her older brother, Bubby.
Yeah.
And her brother is how many years older?
He was 6.5, 7 years older.
So he knew, he was quite a bit older, and he knew what was going on, and he found out that the Jews are going to be rounded up and put on cattle cars to the camps. And the 2 of them make up that they are going to go to watch because they want to see their parents. They found out that their parents are going to be put on those cars. So they went to the town square or wherever it was that they were putting the Jews together, rounding up the Jews, and you stood on the non-Jewish side with your brother, right?
Yes.
And
But with the people.
with the people. And this is something that is worth reading. There was a large crowd near the platform, and it included many Jews filled with despair who asked to enter the cattle cars with their husbands or wives, parents or children, brothers or sisters, because they had a list. So I guess they did the deportations every couple of days, and not everybody went together. To them, to these people, it must have seemed the only choice to be with the people they loved, no matter what fate had in mind. They seemed almost eager to walk into the maw of hell itself. For the locals, this day was indeed a picnic, a festive diversion. They came to celebrate and watch the Jews of Slovakia disappear forever. this is Judith speaking, I stood near the platform, clutching Bobby's hands in the midst of that ongoing, ogling, exuberant crowd. At the train station, Bobby and I, 2 scrawny kids, stood trembling in the midst of the yelling mob. We could hear the thwacks of the sticks beating against Jewish flesh and the approving murmurs from the crowd around us. We strained our necks and stood on our toes as we looked for our parents. From that moment on, I could not bear to let go of Bobby's hand. The noise, the shouts, the beatings, all the vicious activity was overwhelming. My knees were giving way, and I clung all the closer to my brother. I remember counting lots and lots of cattle cars. Some of them were for animals or freight. The rest were marked with the letter Z for Žid, Jews. Crude wooden ramps were placed at the opening of each car. Near the end of the railroad platform, several desks were set up in a row. Behind each one, a Nazi guardman stood with a list. The Nazis yelled, "Faster, faster!" The persecutors shouted at their bereft passengers. Orders and insults were barked out. The very old, the very young, even the very sick were treated with contempt. Beatings continued to accompany the shouts. A cudgel was repeatedly whipped across the back of face of legs of someone who didn't move fast enough. There was method to this madness. Their aim was to create an environment of tension, fear, and despair. To add insult to injury, and to complete their humiliation, the Jews were forced to pay for their passage and for the damages to the cattle cars. Judith and her brother are standing and watching. She's desperate to see her parents. Why was all of this happening? Now you have to imagine a little girl, a 5-year-old girl. Why was all this happening? Suddenly, through the haze, we saw Mama, Papa, Robbie, and Rena, her siblings, pass the checkpoint, and how they were pushed and shoved up a ramp into the cattle car. I began to scream. I began to sob. I wanted my Mama. I wanted my Papa. I wanted Rena and Robbie back with me, to play with me, to be with me. I wanted us all back together as a family. I wanted the safety I had known in the warm bosom of my family. I wanted the peace and protection I used to find in my father's embrace. What was I doing in this awful world? I didn't stop screaming. Suddenly, Papa caught sight of us, and his face turned ashen with fear. "Go away," he shouted at Bobby and me. "Do not get on this train. Go away." Papa surely knew where they were going and ordered us to disappear. When he saw Booby and me in the crowd, he understood he had thus far saved 4 of his children. There was a chance that we might live. That's what he was thinking when he shouted for us to flee. And what were the words your father shouted to you?
Go and live. Go and live. Choose life.
Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a guard checking us out. Still, I could not stop screaming. I could not stop sobbing. "Mama," I cried. "Mama, Papa, don't leave me. Don't leave me. Take me with you. Please, take me with you."
So, after reading something like this, I think,
Was this the last time you ever saw your parents? This was the last time Judith would ever see her parents. They were taken to Auschwitz?
They were taken straight to Auschwitz. Yes. And that was the last I ever saw my father and my papa.
tell us, Judith, about your, I'm sorry. No. Tell us about your escape to Budapest. Budapest was the last, Hungary was the last country that the Nazis invaded. So it was a safe haven because while Czechoslovakia and the other European cities were being occupied by the Nazis, Hungary had made some kind of deal with Hitler, and it seemed to be safe. So, again, I don't know who it was that was looking out for you.
I had an aunt. I think it's better without the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I had an aunt who also lived in Czechoslovakia, and they owned a big farm and a big, they had big properties and so on, and they paid off the Germans, so they survived and they were able to live a regular life. But what happened was they heard that the six of us, well, not the six of us, the four of us, we became orphans, and she felt kind of, she was my father's sister, and she felt kind of responsible. So there was an underground Jews who really worked to save Jews as long as they could. They fought the Nazis and so on. And they heard about these 4 children who were orphans. Suddenly the parents were taken away. And they organized, with my aunt, they organized us. I didn't know what happened to my brother and sister, but I had one older brother who stayed with me, and we escaped. They arranged it that some peasants are going to take care of us on some farm, and we escaped to their farm somewhere, one of the villages or something out in we had no idea where we were, but we were together, my brother and I, and they hid us up in their
Hayloft?
pardon?
Was it a hayloft?
Hayloft. They hid us in a hayloft, thank you. And they decided, the farmers decided that they cannot take me because I'm too young to go. In Europe we had snow like 2 feet, 3 feet, and you had to, it's middle of the winter, and then you had to walk from the place that they were to the border to get me over to Hungary. But they felt they could keep me as their child and hold on to me, and they would just take my brother across the border. But when I heard them, I started crying and holding on to my brother, and I said, please don't leave me here, don't leave me alone, because I don't know anybody, I don't want to be left alone. And my brother never let go of my hand, and together I screamed and I cried and I fought, and they decided they have to take me. And they said, I must walk through the snow, through all this, and I said, I will. Of course, I didn't realize that I couldn't. And we were going through the farms, through the different back roads, and of course the Nazis were with a motorcycle looking if there are people escaping, running, but the peasants were very good, they knew the route, and we got to the border, and they took us over, and I had family living in Budapest, in Hungary, and they were instructed to drop us off at these people, at my aunt and uncles, and they took me there, and suddenly the peasant rings the doorbell and says to my aunt who opens the door, these children we are supposed to deliver to you. You have to understand the history at that time. My aunt couldn't take us in because there was a law in Hungary that anybody who takes in immigrant children or immigrant people, they shall be killed. Not only themselves, but their whole families. They will be, the Hungarian, they were called, I forgot. Helinka guards, yes. And they were just as bad as the Nazis. They were terrible. And if they could kill all of you, they would have. So my aunt said, I cannot endanger my family. I cannot take these children. They are much safer with you, who you are, because you're a non-Jew, and you could protect them, and please take them back with you. I cannot take them. And she said, I'm sorry. And we didn't know the aunt and uncle. That was my mother's sister. We didn't know her, but if you're in a situation that it's your life and your family, I had to justify her action, because what choice would you have? I mean, it's the most dangerous choice that is given to you, whether you would survive or your child would survive.
Take them in.
So they,
Take them in.
take them
That's
in.
the problem.
But they did not take
That is the
them in.
problem with the Jewish people.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
But they did not take us in. So the peasant took us and left us on a park bench, my brother and I, and we didn't speak the language. We didn't know where we were. We were in a foreign country, in a foreign town. We had absolutely no idea. Police came and saw 2 immigrant children. My brother may have spoken the language a little bit. I had no idea. And they took us to criminal prison. They took us to criminal prison where we were thrown into cages. They shaved our heads. There were lice, there were mice, there were everything else. I clung to my brother like there was no flesh on him. And this is where we were for a couple of months. The word got around in Hungary. The word got around in Budapest. There are 2 orphan children who are paying in criminal prison held, and we've got to save them. We've got to get them out of prison. And there are Jews who did go out of their way and did help. And there was a couple who owned the most famous restaurant in Budapest, and they had connection with Horthy. Horthy was the Prime Minister of Hungary, and they made connection there. And by the way, the restaurant was a kosher restaurant, and they took us out of prison, and they loved us like their own children. They became my mother and father. I can't even talk about them because they were so absolutely wonderful, and they became my parents. And that's how we lived for 2 years, had the most wonderful life. I felt like I was a princess, and managed to go to 1st grade, and suddenly the Germans invaded Hungary, and my step-parents, my brother was told in the meantime, there was a very, very famous rabbi who came to town, and he was called Baila. Baila was his name, and he suggested that my brother goes to Israel before the war starts. And
The war in Hungary.
the war in Hungary, in Budapest, it got 2 years later. And my brother went to Hungary, so I was left alone with my parents, and they hid us in a glass house. It was called a glass house because it was a glass factory, and underneath the glass factory was like a cave. They don't have basements, they have like the foundation of the building, like caves it looked like. And there we were hiding for, I have no idea, time and all that. And suddenly the building was invaded, and they lined us up outside on the street, and they started killing the people as the lineup was.
And you were standing there.
And I was standing there with my stepfather. My stepmother was in the kitchen. She was a fabulous cook. So she was in the kitchen hiding in the pantry, and they were able to hide there, but us who were in the cave, we were lined up, and they started shooting people down the line, and I was holding on to my father, And I was thinking, and I will never forget it, if my turn comes, I'm going to lie down on the ground and make believe that I'm dead, that I was shot or dead. This is a 6-year-old, 7-year-old child thinking. That's how I was introduced to my childhood. And sure enough, the Red Cross, Swiss Red Cross came, and the few who remained saved us.
Judith, I want to ask you,
That's part of the book.
yeah, these are just a few incidents in the book, but this was basically Judith's childhood. And, you know, after reading this book, it haunted me. What haunted me most was that to us, it is unfathomable that somebody comes to you, you have a beautiful home, your father has a business, you have security, you go to school, you go to work. Somebody storms into your house, or before they storm into your house, they start putting restrictions on you. You're Jewish, you need to wear a yellow star. You're Jewish, you have a curfew. You're Jewish, you can't go into the parks. To us Americans who are fortunate to be living in this country, it almost seems like you're in the Twilight Zone. It doesn't seem like it's something that actually could have happened, no less in the 20th century. And when I think of what it must be like in the mind of a little girl who can't understand the hatred and the cruelty, I have to ask you, do you live with anger?
For some reason, as a child, I had such a faith in God. As a child, I grew up always with the optimism. I always thought about myself, it's going to be better. It's going to be better. This is now, and I don't know where I got it or how it happened to me, but I always had that faith in God in me. I mean, as a little child, I saw my parents praying, and I saw the tradition in my home, and that must have given me some strength to move forward in my life. Otherwise, I don't know where I got it. It must have been some foundation of my home. And I always thought that, and I must have heard my father maybe talking about that and so on. It's not that I remember the words or anything, but something in me, I had a lot of incidents that if you read my book, you will see where through my faith, I had such a strength to pull myself through to survive. I always had this feeling of I had to survive. I had to move forward. I had to somehow save myself, because there are many other incidents that happened that I wrote about that somehow, I don't know how I crawled out of it. On the other hand, I have a sister who is 7 years older than myself, almost 8 years older, and she looked at everything with bitterness and anger because she suffered most likely much more and she understood it much more. But in my life, I always lived with the hope.
And that's the name of Judith's book, The Candle in the Heart, and you see this as a motif that runs through the book. Judith, I want to ask you, I have heard that Holocaust survivors had a very difficult time speaking about the Holocaust for many years. You know, I grew up in the 60s, and we had a lot of neighbors that had the numbers on their arms, but they never spoke about it. And it took years till they finally were able to. How was it for you?
Well, I didn't have, thank God, I didn't have the number, and thank God I didn't go to camp. I just went to the lager. I don't know, how do you translate that? Lager
Is a camp.
is a camp, so, but I'm talking about the,
Concentration, the death camps.
death camps I'm talking about. And so we were in Lager and we spent time in it. But I was too young to observe quite the sufferings, quite the pain. It's somehow, as a child, you look at things that it's going to be, it's not going to stay like this. It's going to open up and it will change.
So you spoke about your experiences to your children?
I spoke when my kids were young. I told them my story. They grew up with it. But they grew up seeing me as a happy person in respect of, thank God I was here, I have my children, and thank God my life is good. They looked at me as a positive. It was just a story for them that what I went through, but I must say that today my children take the Holocaust very strongly, and they are very active in Jewish organizations, in anything and everything they can give and do, they do it. I'm really very proud of them.
And tell us again why you came out this way, and why you spend your time. What worries you about the future, about the lack of awareness?
But now, what's happening with me is, and I'm sure with you all, but I know what anti-Semitism is out there. I know how it starts. I mean, how it started, I don't remember. But I know the hatred and the jealousy is out there. And the bullying that's going on, it's so dangerous. I can see it. When I was a child and I went in Hungary to school, I was bullied because I didn't speak the language and all that. So I saw, here is this young kid who is slapping me on my face, and because I don't speak the language, I don't do what they do for no reason. And this is what's going on. And also, I believe very strongly that we have to be very proud who we are. We have to be, today, we are, thank God, secured enough to be able to stand on our feet, and not take that bullying, and not take that hatred. We've got to show them love better, because that's a better thing to know. If we can give love and overcome that hatred and teach them, that's why I find it so important for me to go to schools and tell the children, do you know, I got some beautiful, I went to Puerto Rican, I went to Black, I went to Spanish, I went to every kind of children to speak and tell them my story. And I said to them, stop this bullying, what's going on. Be who you are and be proud of who you are. Stand on your own feet, because you are just as good as anybody else. Just as good. You don't have to wear that fancy thing or whatever they wear. You are a person who created himself and who has a home, who is able to do things out there. We don't have to take this hatred that was going on, the hate day. Suddenly there is a hate day. I never heard such a thing. But I watched the news, and I must tell you, I saw Temple Emmanuel in New York, what they did. They took the services on Shabbat out onto the street, and they had the whole Shabbat services outside in front of the synagogue. They showed, I don't care who you are or what you are, your problem is you hate, that's your problem. We are not going to stand anymore for it. We've got to, we are proud Jews, and we will not take any more of this situation, because God forbid, if we allow it, there will be another Holocaust. us. So let's be proud and let's be strong. I'm so happy to see that young boy there. I'm very proud of him that he's here and he's listening to what can be if we don't watch out.
You know, your story reminds me of Stratford, Connecticut, 1969. When I used to go to school and get called Dirty Jew and hit by choir boys. Your story resonates in me. So you know what I did? I went into bodybuilding. I says, well, if I look menacing, they won't bother me. And my goal is to make it into the Mr. America, and I did, 1995. Because we Jews usually own the teams. We never play the games. So that's what I did. Your story resonates with me so much. It really does. So when you say that we're free here, we Jews are never free. What makes us special is we are less than 1% of the population. Out of 880 Nobel Peace Prize winners, we are 200. 200 out of that. And that's what we have to be proud of. When you have Benjamin Netanyahu say, and I quote, that we used Israel as lab rats. That's what he said. I have it on audio. When the whole COVID thing happened, he's no better than Mengele. He should be taken out of office.
On that note,
Yes.
I would like to say that I think some of you have heard me say this before, but what Judith just said about being proud of who you are, this is why we are here in Shelton today, because Chabad is here, because in the 1950s, when Chabad relocated from Europe to the United States, it was right after the Holocaust. Jews were afraid or ashamed to identify as Jews, and the Lubavitch Rebbe wanted to turn that around, and so he started doing things like public menorah lightings, Lag BaOmer parades, Passover communal seders. He tried with all his creativity and all his innovation to instill pride, to imbue Jewish people with pride, and remind them that you are now living in a country where you can assert your Jewish identity. So the tide has turned, and yes, we're faced with a lot of challenges today, but hiding is not the way to go, and denying your Jewish identity is not the way to go. And we just heard this from Judith ourselves. I want to, again, encourage you to read the book. It's a book that tells you so much about how easy it is to behave in a very depraved way, but also how noble the human spirit can be. Judith has amazing examples there of loving people and people who've risked their lives to save her and to save other Jews. I want you to get the book, but I want to give us a few minutes to ask Judith questions. Please, if anybody wants to.
What happened to your other siblings?
So, when I was a teenager, I lived in England, and I got a very ideal, well, basically, we discovered each other, we found each other.
Oh, great.
Yes, we found each other, and my siblings went to Israel, and I went to England on the last kinder transport. I went to England, and a part of my book will tell you that I went to a convent school where the Christians were trying to also help us, and also they were hoping we will become Christians. and it's a very interesting part. And also in Israel, I met my siblings, and it was wonderful. It was first time I got to really know them. I never grew up with them. And today, my two brothers, they died in Israel, and my sister lives in Sydney, Australia, and she has a family, and my brothers have families. So I came to the United States. You will find out in the book. And
home in I don't know how you pronounce it.
In my hometown. Yes, I did go back. I had an opportunity to go back there, and my home, which was a beautiful home, became a factory. And it became a factory, and today I heard it became an office building. So there is a lot of changes. And by the way, I may go back again in June because my grandson became champion, became an international ball hockey player. He was accepted into the international, and he was invited to Prague to play in the game. So they insisted I must come and see him, and if I'm in Czechoslovakia, in Prague, it's going to play in Prague, Czech Republic, which was in between Split, and I hope maybe I will take my family to my hometown.
Any other questions for? Yes.
I know after the liberation of a lot of the concentration camps, there was after the liberation of concentration camps, there was a survivor network to try to figure out what happened to some of the people who are in places like Auschwitz. Were you able to find out more about your parents being there?
Yes. First of all, we were all hoping. Well, I didn't. My sister did, and she told me. So this is what she did. She reported about my parents and my siblings, that they were taken to Auschwitz. She looked for them, hoping that they survived it. They couldn't find it, but years later, they were listed.
They were what? They were
Listed.
How long were you in Hungary? Did you stay in Hungary till the end of the war?
The Russians came and they liberated Hungary. So I was there for a year, but I got, for being hidden in the cave, I got very, very sick. I had some problems with my lung, and I had to rest up. And what happened was that I had some lung disease I had. According to today's doctors, they think I had TB, but they had no proof of it. But I was for many, many months in the freezing cave down below of that building. And so I was sent back to Czechoslovakia to a sanitarium, children's sanitarium in the Tatra Mountains, which are part of the Alps, you know. And in the mountains, thank God, everything was fine. And then I was sent to another orphanage, and that's when I wound up in a convent.
Yes.
I'm wondering, have you recorded your story?
You're asking with the Shoah Foundation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judith, for making the trip out here today and sharing your story with us. And I just want to point out that this is something that is crucial and important to educate our youth, as I mentioned earlier about the study. So if you know of any school teachers, I know sometimes I got a few requests after I posted the event. There are school teachers or principals, even sometimes superintendents, whatever it may be, you feel in your town, you may want to bring a Holocaust survivor to speak. Feel free to reach out to myself or to Leah, and we'll be happy to bring it to your school, as you know how important it is. Thank you very much for coming out here. I did want to mention that next week is the holiday of Purim, where we celebrate almost like what we say in every Jewish holiday. They tried to kill us, we won, and let's eat. So it's a very, very special holiday. This year we're celebrating actually here in this room, in this ballroom. It's going to be a themed party, Purim in the Shtetl. So we're going back, if you're familiar with Fiddler on the Roof, it's going to be themed around that a lot. So feel free to join us next week, March 7th at 5 o'clock. And as well as in June, this is something that I feel most of you, if not all of you, will benefit, and I encourage you to join us. Last year was the first year we had a Shelton Jewish Festival. That was in June. This year we're also hosting it at the end of June. I believe it's June 25th. You can look out for it on social media, online, emails. We're going to have a Shelton Jewish Festival with klezmer music, kosher deli, which I know is almost impossible to find over here. You know, real authentic kosher deli. It's kosher style, but not kosher deli. So that's going to be in June. And again, thank you very much for joining. If you'd like to purchase the book, you can meet right outside at the front desk as you exit. And Judith, I don't know if you're up for it, but if someone may want an autograph, feel free to say yes or no. But thank you very much for joining.
I know.
Hold on. I'll just buy the book.
Yeah, you could borrow the book after we're done with it.
It's sort of like bringing the Shabbat outside and having it as.
I remember when I used to go to USY, and they were They what? They tortured us. We had